The Galactic Council chamber was a place of cold marble and hard light. The walls stretched high, made from materials that had been refined across thousands of years by civilizations that have forgotten more about technology than most species would ever know. Ambassador Vexter stood before the assembly, his crystalline body reflecting the strange light that filled the space. 4 of his appendages moved in precise gestures as he presented the report on humanity to the gathered council members. The humans possess no meaningful technological advancement, Vexter said. His voice was not cruel, only factual. Their weapon systems are crude. Their ships travel slowly through space. They have made no attempt to enhance their biological forms through genetic modification or neural implants. Their planet is dangerous and hostile, which has forced them to develop survival skills that are purely defensive in nature. We recommend placing them in the protected territories where they cannot interfere with the greater powers of the galaxy. They are harmless, but they are also useless. The council members from various species listened without much interest. The Xalans, whose massive frames were covered in tactical armor, simply nodded. They had conquered 3 other species in the last century and saw no reason to take threats from primitives seriously. The Void Collective, beings made partially of dark matter and mathematics, found the assessment efficient and acceptable. The Archons, ancient creatures whose names had been spoken in history for so long that they had become like gods, did not even look up from their own readings. No one disagreed. No one questioned. This was the way of the council. The strong decided, and the weak accepted. Across the vast distance of space, on a small blue planet called Earth, retired Colonel Marcus Howard was sitting alone in his apartment when the news came through. He was watching a government broadcast that showed humanity's official induction into the Galactic Council. The cameras showed human diplomats standing among alien beings that towered above them or looked so strange that it hurt the eyes to look at them. The humans looked small. They looked fragile. They looked exactly like what the council had decided they were: harmless and weak. Marcus was 72 years old. He had fought in 3 major wars on Earth. He had seen young soldiers grow into experienced warriors. He had seen fear change into courage when people understood that the alternative to fighting was death. He had learned, over 4 decades of military service, that humans had a special capacity for doing the impossible. When their backs were against the wall, he listened to the diplomatic speech with something that looked like sadness but felt more like recognition. The humans were thanking the council for accepting them. They were grateful for the protection that came with membership. They were speaking the language of those who had decided they were weak and had accepted that weakness as their truth. Marcus set down his coffee cup, which had gone cold, while he watched. He understood exactly what was happening. The council had looked at humans and seen only what was visible on the surface. They had not understood that the greatest human strength was invisible. It was the ability to survive when survival seemed impossible. It was the will to keep fighting when fighting should have been hopeless. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks in which nothing special happened on Earth. The planet continued its rotation. Governments met in their capitals. Ordinary people went about their ordinary lives, satisfied that they now belonged to something greater than themselves. Then the Xalans came. They did not announce themselves or request permission. They simply arrived in orbit above Earth in a vessel that was half the size of the moon. Their message was direct. They were seizing the human diplomatic station that orbited Luna. All personnel were now prisoners of war. Earth would pay a tribute in raw materials and industrial goods, or the Xalans would begin executing prisoners in groups of 50. Once per day, the human government convened emergency meetings. The Galactic Council held a session to discuss the situation. The response from the Council was exactly what Marcus had feared. They offered sympathy, but no action. They said that humans lacked the military capability to mount any kind of rescue operation. They said that such an attempt would be suicide. They recommended that humanity accept the loss, negotiate the tribute payment, and learn to live peacefully within the established order. The humans were told, very clearly, that they were not strong enough to fight back. Marcus received a call from Lisa Brennan that evening. Lisa was retired like him, a former captain who had spent 40 years in the military and another 15 running a private security consulting company. She had a mind that saw problems and automatically calculated solutions. She'd also listened to the council's response and understood what it meant. "They will keep taking from us," Lisa said without any greeting. "Once they understand that we will not fight back, they will take everything. They will take people. They will take resources. They will keep taking until there is nothing left to take." "I know," Marcus said. "Are you going to do anything about it?" Marcus looked out his window at the night sky. Somewhere up there, in orbit around the moon, human beings were being held prisoner. Scientists, diplomats, people who had families waiting on Earth. The government had decided to negotiate. The council had decided to do nothing. The established powers had decided that humans were too weak to act. "Yes," Marcus said. "I'm going to call people I know. People who have forgotten more about combat than most people will ever learn. People who understand that sometimes you have to do the impossible because accepting defeat is unacceptable." Lisa made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You know this will probably get us killed." "Yes, and you're going to do it anyway." "Yes, then I will help you," Lisa said. "And I know at least 15 other people who will help as well. People who remember what it means to fight for something that matters." That night, Marcus began making calls. Each call was to someone he had served with, someone he had learned to trust in situations where trust meant the difference between life and death. He did not ask them to volunteer for something illegal. He did not ask them to risk their lives. He simply told them what had happened and what he was planning to do. Every person he called said yes. They came from all over the country. A retired Air Force pilot named David Pope, who still remembered how to fly anything with engines. A former engineer named Kevin Grant, who had spent 30 years designing systems that other people said were impossible to build. A woman named Susan Hayes, who had spent her life learning how to break into places that were supposed to be unbreakable. Others arrived with their own expertise. A doctor, a communications specialist, a weapons expert, a logistics officer. They gathered in an old aerospace facility that nobody used anymore, hidden in the desert where nobody paid attention to what happened. They spread maps across tables. They looked at thermal images and architectural schematics of the Zealand ship. They calculated distances and power, requirements and weapon trajectories. Marcus stood in the center of it all and spoke the simple truth that nobody else was willing to say out loud. "We are going to rescue those people," he said. "The government will not do it. The council will not do it. So we will do it. We will plan this operation carefully. We will use every advantage that our experience can give us. And we will succeed or we will die in the attempt. But one way or another, the Zealands are going to learn that humans are not powerless." The room was quiet. Outside, the desert wind blew sand against the windows. These old soldiers and experienced professionals understood what Marcus was asking. They understood the risk. They understood that they might all be dead within weeks. And every single one of them was ready to move forward. The Zealands, sitting confidently in their orbital ship, had no idea what was coming for them. They had read the Council's assessment. They believed that humans were weak. They believed that humans would surrender to force because humans had no capacity for resistance. But the Zealands had never faced humans who had nothing to lose and who understood exactly how to turn disadvantage into opportunity. They had never fought against warriors who had spent lifetimes learning that the impossible was just another word for challenge. In 6 days, everything would change. The old aerospace facility in the Nevada desert had become the center of humanity's first independent military operation against an alien power. The building was made of metal and concrete, built decades ago for research projects that the government had stopped funding long before anyone could remember why. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, charts, and detailed analysis of the Zealand ship that hung in orbit above the moon. Marcus sat at a large table that had been brought from somewhere, studying the technical specifications. Beside him was Lisa, her hands moving rapidly across a keyboard as she calculated firing angles and approach vectors. The coffee makers in the corner worked continuously. Energy drinks sat empty on every available surface. Outside, the sun was setting on the 3rd day of their planning, and everyone in the room knew they were running out of time. Their shield system operates on a rotating cycle, said Patricia Lynch, a retired aerospace engineer who had designed systems for military aircraft for most of her adult life. She pointed at the thermal image of the Zealand ship on the large screen. Every 90 seconds, their primary shield generator cycles through a maintenance phase. During that phase, the secondary generator takes over. But there is a 12-second overlap where both systems are functioning at reduced capacity. That is our opening. David Pope, the retired Air Force pilot, shook his head. 12 seconds is not enough time to do anything useful. We need at least 30 seconds to breach their shields, get through their hull, and reach the detention area. Which is why we are not going to try to do everything in those 12 seconds, said Lisa. She pulled up another set of thermal images, showing different sections of the Zealand ship. We attack multiple targets at the same time. We force them to divide their attention and resources. When their focus is split between 5 different problems, their response time becomes predictable. Their defensive protocols will not be prepared for simultaneous attacks from multiple angles. Kevin Grant, the engineer who had built impossible things throughout his career, leaned forward with interest. You are talking about overwhelming them with chaos. I am talking about creating a situation where they cannot defend against everything at once, Lisa said. Standard military doctrine says you do not attack a superior force head-on. You do not try to beat them using their own strengths. You attack their weaknesses and their assumptions. Marcus listened carefully. He had fought enough battles to know that Lisa was right. The Zealands would expect a conventional assault. They would expect humans to attack their strongest defensive positions. The best way to win was to attack nothing they expected. What are the weaknesses? Marcus asked. Patricia pulled up new images. Their communications array here. It is heavily defended, but it is also located on their external hull in an exposed position. If we can damage it, they cannot call for reinforcements. Their engine stabilizers here operate on a separate power grid from their shields. If we disrupt that power, they lose the ability to maneuver quickly. And their detention block here is where the prisoners are held, but it is protected by standard security systems, not military-grade defenses. Over the next 3 days, the team grew. A retired naval officer named Henry Barnes arrived with access to reconnaissance drones that had been decommissioned from military service. The drones were old and slow, but they had one advantage that made them invaluable. The Zealands had no recognition protocols for them. The drones would simply look like pieces of asteroid debris floating in space. Susan Hayes came from California, with her expertise in breaking into places that were designed to stay closed. She brought technical knowledge about Zealand, security systems that she had obtained through methods she did not bother to explain. A former weapons specialist named Robert Chun contributed ideas about how to create maximum damage with minimum resources. A communications officer named Jennifer Walsh showed them how to manipulate radio frequencies in ways that would create confusion. In the Zaylan communication networks, each person who arrived added a piece to the puzzle. Each brought their own experience and knowledge. Each understood the risks. Each also understood something that the Galactic Council had failed to grasp. Humans did not follow orders because they believed those orders were morally correct. They followed orders because they had trained to do so, because they understood discipline, because they knew that cooperation meant survival. But when those same humans decided that the orders were wrong, when they decided that following the rules meant abandoning people who needed help, they could move mountains. By the 5th day, the planning was complete. The team had identified every critical system on the Zaylan ship. They had calculated firing angles. They had determined the exact timing needed for the operation to succeed. Lisa had created a backup plan for the backup plan, because wars never went exactly as planned and good soldiers prepared for chaos. Marcus gathered everyone together for a final briefing. The group now numbered 32 people, all of them retired military personnel or former government employees. All of them were breaking laws by being here. All of them knew that if the operation failed, they would face execution charges in multiple jurisdictions. "Tomorrow we execute this operation," Marcus said. His voice was calm and clear. "I will not lie to you. This is dangerous. The probability of success is low. The probability of some of us being killed is very high. The probability that Earth's government will execute us if we survive is also significant." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of people he had known for decades, veterans, warriors, people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. "But I also know that those people held captive up there are going to die if nobody helps them. The Council has decided not to act. The government has decided not to act. So we have to act. We have to be the ones who refuse to accept that defeat is inevitable. We have to be the ones who show the galaxy that humans are not powerless." David Pope raised his hand. "What if we get inside the ship and the prisoners are not where we think they are? What if the layout has changed or the thermal imaging is wrong? Then we improvise," Lisa said. "We have been trained to improvise. That is what makes us different from them. They have technology and superiority in numbers. We have experience and adaptability and the will to keep fighting even when fighting seems hopeless." The night before the operation, Marcus found himself alone on the roof of the facility, looking up at the stars. He was thinking about his daughter, Catherine, who was now an adult with children of her own. He was thinking about what would happen to them if this operation failed and he was executed for treason. Lisa climbed up beside him, moving carefully because her age was catching up with her in ways it had not 30 years ago. "You are thinking about giving up," Lisa said. "No," Marcus replied. "I am thinking about what my life would be worth if I knew I had let those people die because I was afraid." "Then we are in agreement," Lisa said. "Tomorrow we do this thing. Tomorrow we show the Zaylans and the Galactic Council that they made a mistake when they assumed humans are powerless. The stars above them were ancient and cold and indifferent to human struggles. But somewhere up there, orbiting the moon, was a ship full of human beings who were about to learn that sometimes ordinary old soldiers could accomplish extraordinary things." The 3 civilian vessels moved through the darkness of space on carefully calculated trajectories. They looked like merchant ships, the kind that carried goods between human colonies and space stations. The Zaylans, watching from their orbital position, did not even assign extra sensors to track them. Merchant vessels came and went from Earth regularly. There was nothing about these 3 ships that raised any alarms. Inside the lead vessel, David Pope sat in the pilot's seat with his hands resting lightly on the controls. He had flown more than 1,000 combat missions in his career, but this was different. This was not an official military operation with authorization from governments and military chains of command. This was 3 ships of old soldiers attempting to rescue prisoners from an alien warship. If they were caught before they reached the docking bay, they would all be killed or captured. Kevin Grant sat beside him, monitoring communication frequencies. His eyes tracked multiple screens as he waited for the signal to begin the operation. They had practiced this sequence hundreds of times in the facility in Nevada. But practice was not the same as reality. Real combat always moved faster and felt sharper and more dangerous than any simulation. Below on Earth, in the Tactical Operations Center, hidden in the desert, Marcus sat before a large display screen showing the approach of all 3 ships. Lisa stood beside him, her eyes tracking vectors and timing sequences. This was the critical moment. If the Xalans detected them now, before they were in position, the entire operation would collapse before it began. All vessels are maintaining approach trajectories, reported Jennifer Walsh from her communication station. No indication that the Xalans have increased alert status. They are not expecting an attack. The Xalans had never expected anything like this before. The idea that humans would attempt a military operation was so far outside their calculations that they could not even imagine it. In the Xalan mind, humans were primitive creatures with primitive minds. They would accept their defeat because accepting defeat was what weak species did. The lead ship approached the Xalan vessel on a vector that matched hundreds of previous merchant deliveries. David Pope transmitted the false credentials that the team had created through pure technical brilliance. Forged shipping manifests, fake registry numbers, all designed to pass the minimum security checks that the Xalans would bother to perform. The Xalan response came back quickly. Barely interested. Clearance verified. Proceed to Docking Bay 7. Standard cargo unloading procedures will be observed. In the tactical center, Marcus checked the chronometer. 70 seconds until the shield generator phase cycle that would give them their opening. All teams report readiness status. Marcus said into his communication headset. Strike. Team 1 is ready, came David's voice. From the lead ship. Strike Team 2 is ready, reported Susan from the second vessel. Strike Team 3 is ready, said Robert Chun from the third ship. The 3 vessels moved into their final approach positions. 2 of them took positions that would appear to be debris or minor equipment deployments. The Xalans simply ignored them. Why would they pay attention to the movements of an inferior species? Why would they consider that those movements might be coordinated and deliberate? The lead vessel entered Docking Bay 7. The clamps extended and engaged with a sound that echoed through the ship. The ramp descended with a grinding of mechanical systems. Inside the docking bay, the Xalans working there barely glanced up from their duties. Merchants bringing supplies. Nothing worth paying attention to. 40 seconds to phase cycle, Lisa announced. Marcus led the first strike team through the docking ramp. 12 people, all moving with the precise coordination that came from decades of training. They wore suits that looked like commercial workers. Uniforms, but were actually protective gear designed to keep them alive if things went wrong. They carried weapons that the humans had designed to be effective against the specific armor that the Xalans wore. 20 seconds. Lisa said. The team moved through the Xalan ships, corridors toward the detention block. Behind them came the second wave of personnel, carrying equipment and supplies. They moved quietly, but quickly. Speed was essential. The moment the Xalans understood what was happening, the operation would enter its most dangerous phase. Susan moved toward the detention block security station. She had studied every specification of the Xalan security system. She understood the mathematics of their encryption. She understood the way that technology, no matter how advanced, could be broken if you understood its fundamental logic. Her fingers flew across the portable terminal that she carried. Lines of code appeared on the screen. Countercodes that she and her team had spent 3 days preparing. The detention block security system, designed to keep enemies out, found itself under assault from inside its own logical framework. "The prisoners are being moved," came an alert from Henry Barnes, watching the thermal drone feeds. "The Xalans are conducting a routine prisoner transfer. They are moving through Corridor 7, heading toward the main detention block." It was coincidence. Pure chance. The operation had been timed around routine schedules and normal procedures. But the prisoners and their Xalan guards were moving through the exact corridor where the strike team needed to operate. 10 seconds to phase cycle. Lisa announced that Marcus made a decision in less than a second. This was war. War was not planned. War was improvisation and adaptation and the ability to recognize that a different opportunity was better than the original plan. Strike Team 1, abort designated route. Intercept the prisoner transfer at Corridor Intersection 7. Go now. David Pope and his team changed direction immediately, moving toward the new location. They did not hesitate or question. Training meant that they could respond to sudden change without needing to think about it. The Xalans moving the prisoners never saw what was coming. Stun weapons designed to disable without killing dropped the alien guards instantly. The humans, moving with practiced efficiency, placed the prisoners in protective formation. Scientists, diplomats, children, families that the Xalans had captured to demonstrate their power. "Move to Extraction Point Alpha," Marcus commanded. "Lisa, we need a clear corridor. Everyone else is going to try to stop them." Lisa manipulated the electronic systems of the ship through the terminal connection that Susan had established. Doors that should have opened remained closed. Corridors that should have filled with Xalans instead filled with temporary barriers made from equipment and furniture. It was not elegant, but it was effective. The Xalan security forces began responding to the chaos. Alarms screamed through the corridors. The ship's entire defensive system activated. But the Xalans were responding to threats they could not understand, to patterns of attack that did not match any tactical doctrine they had ever studied. "Phase cycle is complete," Lisa announced. "You have lost your shield advantage. Enemy defensive capabilities are now fully online." "Then we move faster," Marcus said. The strike teams formed a protective cordon around the prisoners. They moved through the Xalan ship with weapons ready, laying down suppressing fire when Xalans appeared. But they did not attack to kill. Marcus had been explicit about that. This was rescue, not genocide. They would defend themselves, but they would not commit acts of unnecessary destruction. The lead vessel's docking ramp was directly ahead. David Pope was already running the engines, warming up systems for immediate departure. The moment the last person crossed the ramp, he would initiate undocking procedures. A Xalan security team appeared ahead of them, weapons raised and ready. Marcus threw a thermal detonator that exploded in a shower of controlled heat, forcing the aliens back. The prisoners ran past, guided by soldiers who kept them moving forward. An elderly diplomat collapsed from exhaustion. A young soldier named Frank Reeves picked her up and carried her, never breaking stride. David's voice came through the communication headset. "All personnel approaching docking position. Prepare for immediate departure." The last of the prisoners crossed the ramp. The last of the soldiers moved across. Marcus waited until everyone was clear. Then he fired another detonator behind him, creating a barrier of heat and debris. "Undocking," David announced. The clamps disengaged with a sound like thunder. The 3 ships separated from the Xalan vessel simultaneously. Thrusters fired to accelerate them away, moving them toward jump distance where they could escape to hyperspace. The Xalans, finally understanding what had happened, attempted to pursue. Weapons fire lanced through space behind the human vessels. But the Zalans were damaged, confused, and dealing with a situation their minds had not prepared them for. David Pope's piloting was magnificent. He moved the ship through the fire with the skill of someone who had practiced that exact maneuver 1,000 times. Kevin deployed countermeasures that confused the Zalan tracking systems. The other two ships split their formation, forcing the Zalans to choose targets. Jump distance achieved. Lisa announced from the tactical center, entering hyperspace in 10 seconds. David confirmed that the Zalan weapons fire became increasingly inaccurate. The human ships moved with the precision and grace that only came from pilots who had trained their entire lives for moments exactly like this. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session that lasted for 3 days straight. The chamber, which was usually a place of measured discussion and careful deliberation, had become a place of chaos and confusion. The report was impossible to deny. A human military force had conducted a successful assault on a Zalan starship, disabled its critical systems, rescued prisoners of war, and escaped into hyperspace. The Zalans demanded immediate action. They called for the complete annihilation of the human species. They claimed that humanity had violated fundamental laws of galactic civilization. They declared that humans were a violent and primitive threat that needed to be eliminated before they could pose further danger to established order. But something unexpected had happened. The other species in the council, species that the Zalans had bullied and subjugated over the centuries, began speaking up. The Valthari merchants revealed that the Zalans had captured their traders in the same manner as the humans. The Korvax Collective shared stories of how Zalan military forces had attacked their settlements without provocation. The Archons, who had spoken in favor of allowing the humans to die without rescue, began to ask difficult questions about Zalan conduct. The meeting dissolved into argument. The Void Collective demanded that the Zalans face charges of piracy and kidnapping. The smaller species, emboldened by the revelation that the humans had actually fought back, demanded investigations into decades of Zalan aggression. And on Earth, Marcus Howard was arrested. The human government had realized what had occurred in secret and had moved quickly to arrest Marcus and everyone they could identify who had been involved in the rescue operation. Lisa was arrested at her office. David was taken from his home. Kevin was apprehended at the aerospace facility. One by one, the members of the operation were brought into custody. Marcus was held in a military detention facility that had been built 50 years ago for dangerous prisoners of war. The cell was small and cold. The guards treated him with something between respect and anger. He was a traitor to human civilization, but he was also a decorated veteran with decades of military service. That contradiction made them uncertain about how to treat him. 3 days after his arrest, Marcus was moved to a courtroom and told that he would be tried by a Galactic Council tribunal. The human government was attempting to appease the Zalans by prosecuting the humans who had attacked them. By executing Marcus and his team, the government hoped to demonstrate humanity's commitment to law and order. But something unexpected happened during the trial that changed everything. The prisoners, who had been rescued, began giving testimony. Dr. Catherine Wells, a diplomat who had been held for 3 months before the rescue, spoke about what the Zalans had done to the captives. She described the threats of execution. She described the systematic degradation and humiliation. She described watching other prisoners die because the Zalans believed that humans were expendable. Then she spoke about the rescue. She described how soldiers had risked their lives to come into an alien warship, how they had moved through corridors filled with dangers that would have terrified ordinary people, how they had chosen to rescue hostages rather than escape with valuable information or technology. They did not have to do this, Catherine said, her voice steady and clear in the council chamber. The government could have negotiated. The council could have intervened. But these people, these soldiers, decided that saving human lives was more important than following the rules. I am alive because they were willing to break laws and face death to bring us home. Other prisoners gave similar testimony. A scientist who had been interrogated about Earth's technological capabilities. A young diplomat who had been used to send propaganda messages back to Earth. A teacher who had been held in the same cell block as the children who had been kidnapped. The trial became something other than what the human government had intended. Instead of becoming a demonstration of humanity accepting punishment for rebellion, it became a demonstration of something else entirely. It became a demonstration of human courage, of sacrifice, of unwillingness to abandon those who needed help. Then Marcus was asked to speak in his own defense. He stood in the dock and looked directly at the council members. He did not beg for mercy. He did not apologize for his actions. He spoke with the calm clarity of a man who had made his peace with consequences. I am 73 years old, Marcus said. I have spent 40 years of my life serving in the military. I have fought against enemies. I have commanded soldiers in combat. I have made decisions that resulted in deaths. I am not an innocent person. I am a killer, trained and experienced and professional. He paused and let his words settle into the chamber. But I am also a human being. And I know something about humans that your assessment of us was missing. You measured power by technology. You measured capability by the size and sophistication of weapon systems. You made a logical error. You assumed that because we did not have advanced weapons, we were not dangerous. This was incorrect. Marcus gestured to the council members from the species that had bullied the Xalans. These species know the truth about us now. They know that humans do not accept defeat when people we care about need our help. We do not follow laws when those laws require us to abandon innocence. We do not calculate the probability of success and surrender if that probability is low. We calculate the cost of doing nothing and decide whether we can accept living with that cost. This is what separates us. This is what your assessment failed to understand. He looked directly at the Xalans. You took prisoners. You demanded tribute. You believed that humans would surrender because we were weak. You were wrong. We are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. We are not the most powerful. But we are dangerous in ways that your military doctrine does not account for. We are dangerous because we are willing to die for each other. We are dangerous because we understand that some things matter more than survival. The council chamber was silent. No council member had ever heard an alien species speak with such defiance and clarity about its own nature. The judgment came 3 weeks later. The council would not execute Marcus and his team, but neither would they allow them complete freedom. Instead, the humans would face permanent exile from human space. Their citizenship would be revoked. Their records would be expunged. They would become non-persons, allowed to live, but not allowed to return to the world they had fought to protect. It was a punishment designed to satisfy everyone and punish no one severely. But the symbolic meaning was clear to every species in the galaxy. The humans had demonstrated something that the council could not ignore. Humans had proven that they were not powerless. The Xalans, their reputation shattered, withdrew from multiple trade agreements. Other species that had suffered under their rule began demanding restitution and compensation. The Xalans found themselves isolated and diminished in the galactic hierarchy. They had lost something far more valuable than any prisoners or resources. They had lost the assumption of superiority that had allowed them to commit atrocities without consequence. In a holding cell 3 hours before his exile, Marcus said goodbye to Lisa. They stood across from each other, understanding that they would likely never speak again. "We did it," Lisa said. "We did something," Marcus replied. Whether it was the right thing will be decided by history. We brought the prisoners home. That is what matters to me. Lisa nodded. She had made peace with sacrifice long ago, as all soldiers did eventually. There were victories that came with costs you had to accept. This was one of them. 2 years passed. The Galactic Council published a formal reassessment of human civilization. It was a document that circulated throughout known space and was studied by every major species. The assessment acknowledged the error of the previous evaluation. It stated clearly that humans possessed capabilities that did not fit into conventional measurements of power. The Council had been wrong in its initial assessment, and that error had cost them credibility and standing. More significantly, the reassessment included something unprecedented: an apology. The Council acknowledged that it had failed in its duty to protect the member species from aggression. It acknowledged that by refusing to act when the Xalans kidnapped human citizens, it had abandoned its fundamental purpose. It acknowledged that its blindness to human capability had created a dangerous gap in its own understanding. The document became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. It became the subject of philosophical debates in universities on 100 worlds. And it became the foundation for a new understanding of what power actually meant in galactic civilization. Marcus Howard sat on a beach in California, watching the ocean as the sun began to set. He was no longer a military officer. His rank had been stripped. His decorations had been removed. His service record had been classified as non-existent by human government. He was officially a non-citizen of Earth, though he lived on Earth because the galaxy had no other place for him. His daughter Catherine sat beside him, along with her 2 children. They were the only family he had left. His wife had passed away years before. His other friends and comrades had scattered across the galaxy, or had chosen to accept amnesty deals that removed them from his life. "Do you regret it?" Catherine asked. She was not asking about his military career. She was asking about the operation, about risking everything to rescue people he did not know. Marcus thought about that question carefully. He had asked it of himself many times during the 2 years of exile. He had thought about the friends he had lost, about the soldiers who had been wounded, about the cost to his own life. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "I regret that the Council refused to act. I regret that humans had to prove their worth through violence. But I do not regret that we did it. Because if we had not, those people would still be held prisoner. And Earth would have learned that we are a species that abandons its own people when saving them is too expensive." Catherine's oldest child, a boy of 7, asked what his grandfather did in the war. Catherine explained that grandfather had been a soldier who had helped bring people home. The child did not understand the full complexity of it. Children never did. But his eyes showed respect because children understood, on a basic level, that saving people mattered. The settlement program that followed the trial had been extraordinary. Species from across the galaxy began establishing trade relationships with Earth. The Valthari opened trading posts in major human cities. The Korvax Collective sent scientists to study human history and culture. The Archons, mysterious and ancient, requested human philosophers to debate questions of morality and ethics that had puzzled them for millennia. Lisa Brenton had started a consulting company that worked with the Galactic Council on diplomatic protocols and conflict resolution. Our expertise in recognizing underestimation and turning it into advantage made her invaluable. She worked on cases involving species disputes and territorial conflicts. She became famous across the galaxy as the human strategist, who could see solutions where others saw only impasse. David Pope trained pilots from a dozen different species in tactical flight operations. Kevin Grant worked with alien engineers on systems that should have been impossible to build. Susan Hayes became the head of a security company that worked for multiple galactic governments. Each of them had turned their exile into opportunity. Each had taken what the council had meant as punishment and transformed it into something valuable. But the deepest change occurred in how humans understood themselves. The successful rescue operation, far from elevating military thinking, had somehow matured it. Young humans learned that strength without wisdom was hollow. That power without restraint was merely tyranny. That true capability involved knowing not just how to destroy enemies, but how to protect friends. Earth began producing philosophers and ethicists who were consulted by the council on matters of proper conduct. Human artists created works that explored the themes of courage and sacrifice. Human teachers became famous across the galaxy for their understanding of how to train people to face impossible situations. Dr. Catherine Wells, the diplomat who had been rescued from the Zaylan ship, became humanity's representative to the Galactic Council. In that role, she often spoke about the rescue operation and its meaning. She did not speak about violence or military tactics. She spoke about choices. The operation was successful not because of superior weapons or greater numbers, Catherine explained to a gathering of students from multiple species. It was successful because humans were willing to make a choice that other species had already decided was irrational. We chose to believe that the prisoners could be saved. We chose to believe that experienced soldiers could accomplish the impossible. We chose to believe that our lives were worth less than the lives of those we were trying to rescue. She paused and let that sink in. This is what separates civilization from barbarism. Not the weapons you possess, not the technology you command, but the choices you make about how to use those resources and what principles guide those choices. The humans in that operation could have decided to stay safe. They could have accepted the loss. They could have negotiated a ransom. Instead, they decided to sacrifice themselves for people they did not know. That is the true power. That is the capability that the Galactic Council should have recognized and feared. The Zaylans, diminished and isolated by their own conduct, eventually withdrew from the Galactic Council. Their departure was accepted with relief by species that had suffered under their aggression for centuries. They retreated to their home systems and attempted to rebuild. But their period of dominance had ended. Humanity, the species that had once been considered powerless, became something far more interesting to the galaxy. Not the most technologically advanced, not the physically strongest, not even the most ancient or mystical, but a species that had demonstrated something that made all other qualities secondary. Moral courage paired with tactical brilliance and unwillingness to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. In his apartment in Colorado, Marcus received a message that his exile period had ended. The Galactic Council, in a surprising gesture, had reduced his sentence. He could now travel beyond Earth. He could claim residency anywhere in human space. He was no longer forbidden from his own world. Marcus did not take advantage of the offer. He stayed in Colorado, working as a simple consultant, helping young people understand how to think about conflict and resolution. He did not speak about his military past unless someone asked. He did not accept offers to travel the galaxy and tell his story. He simply lived quietly and simply, with the knowledge that he had done something that mattered. On quiet evenings, he would stand on his balcony and look at the stars. Somewhere up there was a galactic civilization that had learned, through hard experience, that humans were not powerless. That humans could not be dismissed or ignored. That humans possessed something precious. The capacity to choose sacrifice for others and the skills to make that choice matter. The Galactic Council had learned what humans had always known but had needed to prove. True power comes not from what you have, but from who you are and what you are willing to do for those you love. And for a species that had been written off as powerless, that understanding changed everything. It changed their relationships with other species. It changed the way the galaxy perceived human civilization. It changed how humans perceived themselves. Years later, when historians look back at the moment when everything changed, they did not point to technological breakthroughs or diplomatic victories. They pointed to a group of old soldiers who decided that accepting defeat was unacceptable. They pointed to people who chose to believe in something greater than themselves, and they understood, finally, that this was the power that no weapon could match and no technology could replicate. This was the power that made humans something worth reckoning with in the galactic order. The Xalans had learned this lesson at terrible cost. The Galactic Council had learned it through investigation and debate. But all across the galaxy, other civilizations learned it through observation. Humans were not powerless. Humans had never been powerless. They had simply been waiting for the moment when they needed to show it.